All right. Awesome. Well, welcome again, everyone. Uh, I am Jim Merrill with Active Transportation Alliance, filling in for my colleague Maggie, who's usually with you on these calls, who is on parental leave. I'm doing great. So thanks for joining us. There's a lot to talk about today. We're excited to kind of catch folks up on what was a very exciting spring legislative session for the state of Illinois when it comes to walk, bike, public transit. So happy to be able to share an update with that, all of you. But before we get started, let me just run through a little introduction. So we are Active Transportation Alliance. We advocate for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. Hopefully most of you all are familiar with us, but want to make sure to introduce ourselves. And so we work on transit, biking, and walking on the local, regional, and state and federal levels, advancing, smart policy to have a better, more sustainable future. And I'm going to hand it over to Dave Simmons from Ride, Illinois.
Yeah, hey everybody. Good afternoon. Friday, hotter than heck, or maybe not yet. Ride Illinois, we're the nonprofit bike advocacy organization. As this slide points out, our missions to make Illinois better through biking. Proud to partner with Active Trans on many things for many years. So good to see a lot of familiar names and also a few new names here today.
Awesome. Always happy to be with you, Dave. So just we've got a pretty good crowd today, so we're gonna have to kind of manage our time together a little bit. So if you could go ahead and introduce yourself using the chat and let us know what community you're from. This meeting is being recorded, so just letting you be aware of that. And please just use the chat for questions or comments while people are presenting and speaking. And if we have some time towards the end, we can have more of a free-flowing conversation. And then other than that, just keep your microphone muted. Otherwise, I will mute it for you. I will also mute your video if necessary. Hopefully that won't be necessary, but things have happened. And then please, be respectful of presenters and other participants, which I'm sure goes without saying. So just quickly, our agenda, like I said, is really straightforward. We've got our state legislative session recap and have our executive director from Active Trans, Amy Reinell, here, and Dave, who's also up to his neck in state level advocacy this year. Then we got a bunch of updates and announcements to share at the end, and would welcome any updates or announcements from you all that you would like to share too. So hold on to those things you want to share, and we'll make sure to have time at the end for all of that. Oh, there's a picture of Back to Drive. All right, now we're just going to jump into it. State legislative update. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now and hand it over to Amy to get started.
Hey, everybody. It's my periodic visiting of the Suburban Advocacy meeting. Thanks for having me. We are so appreciative of this space and the lessons we learned from you all and the challenges you're facing in your community. And hopefully you see over the years how we use it to directly inform our advocacy agenda. So much appreciation. I know we're a huge region and staying connected is just really important so that we can make this a great place for sustainable transportation. I'm going to talk at the top of the meeting. Thanks for letting me go first because I have another meeting. So I have to hop around 12:30 about what's happening with public transit advocacy at the state level. You may remember, because I presented kind of the problem to you all maybe a year or so ago. So I'll just give a quick overview and hopefully leave some time for questions. For years, we've known that our transit system in Northeastern Illinois, the RTA region, was heading towards a fiscal cliff. That is caused by a few different things, but one of them that's really important, it's related to the fact that we don't put enough money into transit. Our state doesn't put enough money into transit, and specifically, I'm talking about transit operations. So the fuel in the buses, the bus drivers, all that kind of stuff. The state gives about 17% of the operating revenue to the Northeastern Illinois system. Many other states give their urban systems a lot more money. So we've been kind of heading this way for a while, and then it got accelerated by COVID with the drop in ridership. So here we are. Next year, the system is anticipating having a budget hole nearing $800 million. So because we were able to see this coming, a couple years ago, we helped pass legislation at the state level to create a plan. That plan was done by CMAP. I think a few of you participated in that. It was pretty much all of 2023. CMAP led a process called the Plan of Action for Regional Transit. There were 16,000 person hours that went into that plan. And we helped lead the transit system we want work. So we worked with riders across the region, interviewed folks, did town halls, did a bunch of different things to inform what do we want the transit system to be. There were two other groups working on that. One was working on how should the transit system be structured to get to that transit system we want, and how should it be funded. So at the end of 2023, a report was released called the Plan of Action for Regional Transit. And our coalition that we had been building took that plan and turned it into legislation. So that legislation was debated throughout 2024 through another series of 8 public hearings throughout the region, mostly in the suburbs, a few in the city, as well as many, many town halls. I think we're trying to count all the town halls. I think we're up to 60. So there's been a lot of input into this process. In 2025, work began in earnest to like get it done. What is the system we want? What does the state need? What's the state's role in that? And how are we going to raise the money? We determined through the process that the starting dollar amount needs to be $1.5 billion. Because if we just fill that fiscal operating gap, we're going to have the transit system we have today, which we know is letting us down. So we raised up the dollar target and got a lot of support for that. I'm going to fast forward all the way to the May. So the legislative session ended in May. The transit legislation was heavily negotiated between the House, the Senate, the governor's staff, the labor unions that run transit, and the advocates. And we came out with almost an agreed bill, which is what you want in something so complex in the legislature. When it got introduced in the House, it passed out of committee, and then it got introduced in the Senate, and things kind of exploded. And one of the reasons they exploded, which you guys are probably acutely aware of, is it included a few things that kind of fired up the Collier County leadership. And I'm just going to flag some of these. They were taken out of the bill, but I just want to flag them so you guys know that one of them was the Collier counties were during the last transit fiscal crisis, the RTA sales tax was raised. And part of the deal making at that time was the Collier counties wanted more taxing authority. So what they got out of the deal was they got to keep a portion of the RTA sales tax for use in the county on transportation and public safety. Some of the counties don't use any of it for transportation. DuPage uses it only for police. Some of the counties use it for transportation, but mostly roadways and like roadway operations and maintenance. So Senator Villavallen proposed that transit sales tax be used for transit. And there was an outcry by the county chairs. So he immediately took it out the next day. I think that's probably something we'd love to talk with you all at a later time about how those dollars are being used and how could we get more of them going for transit or sustainable transportation. But we won't have time to do that today. The other thing that happened in that legislation that the Senate introduced. It included a fee on tollway charges. And these are the kinds of things that other transit systems are doing to fill their gap. They're looking at transportation sources of revenue and trying to identify ways to increase it. But there was an immediate backlash by the road builder unions and associations who don't want any roadway dollars going to transit. So transit debate hit all the hot button issues of our state, which are the counties want to raise their own money and spend it how they want to, and the road builders don't want any roadway dollars for transit, even though it's transportation dollars, not roadway dollars. And yeah, and I said so many times that the majority of our transit runs on state roadways. So fast forwarding to the last day of session, Senator Villavelum introduced a new source of revenue, a fee on deliveries. So deliveries to your home that were delivered by a vehicle, motor vehicle versus a bicycle. It excluded groceries, medicines, medical supplies, but included food delivery like a burrito or your Amazon deliveries, etc. That passed the Senate. The reform package with that funding passed the Senate. There's other funding sources in there that we can talk about. Went over to the House with a few minutes before midnight. So the House didn't have time to debate it and pass it. So the legislative session ended without transit funding being resolved. And why it was so important to resolve it by the end of May is because now the transit agencies are doing their 2026 budgets, not knowing what their revenue is going to be. And due to civil rights laws, Title VI, they have to, as they plan for cuts, they have to do an extensive equity analysis and process to make sure there's not a disproportionate impact on low-income and communities of color. So the transit agencies that we've been pushing so hard to innovate and do new and better things are now having to like slow down on that front and kind of look backwards to plan for cuts, as well as fare increases, other efficiencies. The reason, even though the fiscal year for them starts January 1, the reason this has to start now is this will include mass layoffs. And mass layoff notices in Illinois are required. The notices have to begin at 90 days out. So in October, end of September, early October, the first wave of notices will have to be issued. So none of us want that to happen. Transit's actually been getting better, and we don't want to undermine rider confidence. We don't want to undermine hiring, and we certainly don't want a reduction in service. So the call to action at this moment is for the legislative leaders to have a special session to finish the job. They've all expressed an understanding that they may need to do that, but they have not yet committed to when that would be. And it won't happen until they've agreed on a revenue package that will pass. They are not going to bring their members back together for something that's not going to pass. So, so we have an action alert that just went live that Jim can put in the chat. To have folks reach out to their elected officials on calling for a special session. But we're also going to do a rally next Thursday at Union Station to just keep the urgency on. We need to keep this very urgent and present in front of our elected officials so that they do take the step of doing all the behind the scenes work on the revenue that they need to be doing and to call a special session. So that's kind of where we're at on the advocacy front. We've been writing a few blogs about this. I don't know if we've published them all yet, but happy to, answer more questions or share more information. I realize that was quick and dirty and perhaps unsatisfyingly high level.
Do people have any questions for Amy? I'm going to drop that link into our latest letter writing campaign. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you so much for that update, Amy. That was really helpful. One question that I have is I've been hearing that first I heard that the transit agencies were developing three different budgets, like a maintenance of current levels of service budget, a cut budget, and then an expansion of service budget. And then later, what I most recently heard was they're developing a cut budget and a maintaining service budget, and not an expansion of service budget. Is that a sign that we probably cannot hope for anything other than really them just like plugging the budget hole, or like where does it stand with the potential like expansions that we are all hoping to see?
So, excellent question. I believe the RTA has said do a cuts budget and do a maintenance budget. Last time around, CTA did 4 scenarios, so it doesn't preclude them from doing additional scenarios. The deal with new revenue, which is likely to get to these dollar amounts that we're talking about, there needs to be new revenue. We cannot increase the RTA sales tax and solve this problem. We can't increase fares and solve this problem. So for new revenue, there's an on-ramp for that revenue. All the rules have to be created and the structures. So we didn't expect that the starting point of the 1.5 billion would all hit on January 1. So there's like the building up of that revenue. There's also the transition period for all the reforms. There's expenses embedded in that. So I think that the investment in service wouldn't happen until much later in the year. So I think it's probably not until these plans get a lot clearer, probably not worth their time for 2026 to be putting a lot of effort into that outside of like the bus plans they're already doing and other things. You know,
Gotcha.
the Pace Pulse plan, the city's Better Streets for Buses plan, those are like things could be ready to go the minute the dollars hit. They might just not be in the budget yet. But the plans are really getting quite solid.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Does anyone have any other transit saga queries?
Sure, I'll ask, does the fee on deliveries as a revenue source, a new revenue source, does that have a shot anymore, do you think? Or will you be all kind of starting from
Yeah.
scratch?
Yeah, I think so. I think I mentioned the categories of purchases it excludes. It also excludes businesses with annual sales in the prior year of $500,000 or less. But it's not clear. We need like a little more data to understand like the equitable implications of that and who's going to be paying that fee. Minnesota did something similar where they excluded purchases under $100. So I think we have a few different folks playing with the numbers right now to see how we can make that a solid solution. There's certainly a lot of really good climate and human behavior benefits to that proposal. The fact that people have stuff delivered to their house every day, you know, when they don't need to, it takes a toll on our safe streets work. We have trucks blocking right of ways and bike lanes. We have more congestion and other things. So I think there's a really important ripple effect into our broader agenda of that fee if it is causing a subset of folks to change their behavior. Obviously, that might not get us the revenue we want, but that gets us other goals that we have. So, yeah.
Awesome. Great. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess continuing on also that point, was there a reason that the proposal had been for statewide? I know a lot of the language used in negotiations up until this point had been that the Chicagoland area was looking to basically fund Chicagoland services. It wouldn't be an expectation on the rest of the state. Would those funds have been instead then, I guess, distributed to other local transit agencies? I know there's only one county in Illinois that doesn't have that, but
Yeah.
presumably they would also still be experiencing that kind of additional fee.
Yeah, so the downstate transit agencies are funded pretty differently than our regions. Transit agencies are, but they also have some problems. So they asked for a handful of things to be fixed and a handful of things that we were already doing related to IDOT reform and transit-oriented development benefit them as well. So the bill was opened up to include all the transit agencies in the state. And the estimated financial need for them was somewhere around $220 million. So that fee would be going right back to their agencies.
All right. Any other questions on transit legislation? Just make another plug for the link in the chat to the action alert. If you could take action yourself, but also share it with your networks. That sends a message to the Senate, House, and to the governor. All three of whom have the ability to call a special session. So making sure everyone gets the word.
I have one more question.
Sure.
One thing just from the active trans perspective, because I know obviously active trans as like an organizing group and advocacy group, I'm wondering, like coming from the municipal perspective from the city of Evanston, I'm wondering if you guys have thought about having some sort of just really clear standard template for municipalities to kind of express their support for this. I know there's been a lot of, we did put forward a transit resolution in the city of Evanston, but it didn't necessarily get a lot of attention. And I think some folks on the city side, not me necessarily, but others are not necessarily don't feel that it's the city's role to be an advocate on this issue. But maybe if there was some sort of like standardized format that could be a little more like provide like a little more clarity or structure to kind of how a municipality could take like just a very clear stance on this. Is that something that you guys have been talking about at Active Trans or any of the coalitions so far?
It's a great idea, Sarah. So do you think, I'll just throw out a few ideas and you can tell me if like any of them get close to the dart. A sign-on letter from mayors could be one idea, like by county, maybe not. Another could be the resolutions you all pass. But I know that just takes a lot of time to pass resolutions, which I know is a lot of what local government ends up doing, but I hesitate to ask you to do it just because of the amount of energy it takes. But I don't know if those are getting close.
I think a standardized sign-on letter that is maybe not drafted by the municipalities, but is maybe shared with them so that maybe folks who aren't thinking about taking leadership on this issue, but know that it's very important, can kind of like opt into something could be helpful. For mayors, I think that if there's just something very concrete that can be sent to the appropriate person, that could be helpful. And just to clarify, Jim, because I see you posted that, the city of Evanston did also pass a resolution. I know other folks did as well, but without promoting the resolution, putting it out there, writing op-eds, resolutions are not that impactful because it's like how many people read the city of Evanston resolution on transit. So yeah, I think as far as influencing the public discourse, maybe something that is a little more gives people the option to opt into could be of use. Just a thought, just coming from working in a municipality, but being mindful that I'm not an advocate and others don't necessarily see their role as being an advocate.
I know and that was this, for people's information, the city resolution, but that was also, I think like the main behind that one was more getting it directly into the hands of the state legislative delegation rather than like a public like strategy. So I think there's like multiple things, but I love the idea of like how can you get more traction out of the same thing anytime we can have like a higher ratio of like different ways to use like the same like level of effort, because it does take a lot to get done, and if we have everyone signing on, so I think it's a great idea. All right, any other great ideas? While we have this assembled, this is like a good daddy group. We got a lot of great questions and stuff. Anything else on the transit front before we move on?
This is a fun transit thing that I'll share that we can include in the follow-up email. We're doing an event with Metra next Friday where we're having a little coffee rave party at the LaSalle Street Station on their new Metra Cafe car. So if folks want to bike on Metra and have a little fun, we're doing a fun transit event that's not advocacy for a few minutes.
Wait, they're bringing back a cafe car? I know that they had discontinued car
Yeah,
decades ago
they're
now.
testing it out. Yep.
Very cool. Metro's doing all sorts of fun things. Appreciate it. Appreciate that about them. All right. Well, I know Amy has to run, but there's also this legislative session a bunch of bike and safe streets related legislation too. So I'm wondering if Dave, I could call on your help to maybe kind of run down some of the highlights on that front.
Yeah, happy to do so. And Amy, thanks for, oh, I missed her. I'll thank her. Poof, she was gone. Yeah, and some of the folks on the call were present at the Illinois Bike and Walk Summit, so familiar with some of the bills that we were advocating for in Springfield back in May. So thank you all for being there or for signing the action alerts, contacting your elected officials. There are, as much as the transit bill is certainly a gray cloud looming over us, there were some wins this year, some bills that are heading to the governor's desk. There were 5 in particular that I wanted to call out. They fall in the bike ped space. And I'll start with the legal definition of a bicycle. And before you say by means to, get that, we get that so much. Like, yeah, we get it. This is the legal definition of a bicycle in the Illinois Vehicle Code. Will now allow for 3 or even 4-wheeled devices. So this was something that really probably could have been done earlier. It does state human powered and electric, low power electric, the approved classes of electric bikes. So the main takeaway is that, folks that are riding trikes or adaptive bikes will be. We're not sure when the governor's going to sign it, and if it's going to be effective July 1 or maybe even January 1st, but they'll be legal on Illinois roads. It really is for their own benefit. It's possible that if someone's riding a trike today and they're in a crash, then an attorney finds out, well, they're not technically legal, and they have less recourse. So it's cleaning up the language, getting us in line with adjacent states. The second bill that we were advocating for at the Bike and Walk Summit was Senate Bill 1559. It's going to require IDOT to conduct a traffic study. With any bill, obviously language matters, but this is specifically when there's a pedestrian fatality at an intersection on an IDOT roadway. In addition to the traffic study, IDOT will be required to report out on their findings and ways to avoid future crashes, whether it's at the intersection where the crash occurred or similar intersections. So we see it as certainly a step in the right direction. Someone even said, "Well, aren't they doing that already?" And I guess not. And now legally, IDOT will be required to do so. So again, another step in the right direction. There's a e-bike or micromobility battery bill, Senate Bill 2447. It's called Micro-Mobility Fire Safety. Chicago and Illinois haven't had necessarily the newsworthy or as many newsworthy incidents with lithium-ion batteries imploding, exploding, causing fires. So this is really a way to catch up to industry and require folks that are selling e-bikes and micromobility devices in the state to make sure that the batteries are tested and certified. It's not going to do anything with all the devices that are out there right now. I hate to be the naysayer there, but we can try to catch up over time and make sure that the devices that are sold have quality, safe, dependable batteries. And then a couple others. There was a bill that passed last year requiring signage on trails before intersections. So there's another bill introduced this year, often referred to as a cleanup bill. So the main thrust of the bill passed last year. It's kind of some additional nuance passed this year, or yeah, it passed both houses, but it's House Bill 2675. And really what the bill says is, yeah, you need to have signage unless there's something at the intersection, like a stop sign or other signage or a traffic control device. So it kind of makes sense, but you can see how lawyers might interpret things differently. And I think one of the more interesting bills that passed, or again, I mean, it has passed, it just hasn't had the governor's signature, but House Bill 2983. So this was a bill that was initiated by the Secretary of State. It's kind of been a couple years in the making. Admittedly, it's all over the place. And if you look up the bill, it says transportation various. It has things like bicyclists must obey the rules of the road. Okay, well, why are we putting that in a bill? That's already the law. But it also notes that motorists must pass bicyclists in a separate lane on multi-lane roads. And I don't like Ride Illinois, I don't Active Trans, like we haven't done a lot of hoopla about that, but those of us, if you're out riding a bike, yeah, 3-foot passing, is that enough? Probably not. This could help influence motorist behavior. We wouldn't endorse lots of additional law enforcement, nor do we think that's going to happen. But if we can get the word out about this, maybe this is something that works its way into the driver's test, and start looking for like this generational long-term shift in motorist behavior, because certainly that pendulum needs to swing back the other way. So yeah, I feel like this one kind of flew under the radar, but it was endorsed by the Secretary of State. They even asked for a quote for a press release that we never really saw. So I think the big element of that bill for bicyclists is that passing in separate lane on multi-lane roads. So those are the ones that are moving forward. There were other bills introduced on e-bike rebates or incentive programs, the Stop as Yield bill, which I know Senate Bill 2111 eventually morphed into the transit bill. So, it's kind of hard to follow some of these things. And I'm just looking at some of the other bills that kind of moved along this year. One bill, again, it was a Secretary of State initiative, which is for senior citizens. And when they have to take the driver's test, it actually pushed the age back, which, I'm going to guess for all of us doesn't really make sense, and maybe we're not supportive of that. 2 reasons, and I believe we spoke with Amy and Active Trans and other orgs about this too. It was supported by AAA and AARP, some pretty beefy, established organizations, as well as the Secretary of State. Illinois was the outlier when it came to the age that the new bill indicates. So it's one of those, we really don't have the manpower, the firepower to go up against it. So it's, it is unfortunate. There are studies that show that older drivers are a little bit safer. We hope that there's no negative recourse from that bill. And speed limits came up a little bit this year, but really didn't go anywhere. So I will say, talking with our lobbyist, we met with them last week and already kind of looking at what kind of groundwork can we lay now between sessions? What kind of prioritization should we be doing? Some of you may know that Right Illinois has an advocacy committee, so we'll be chatting with our advocacy committee. We're going to reach out to some affiliated clubs and community orgs, try to get some input. So we're really ready to hit the ground running come fall, as far as what the priorities are going to be for 2026. I hate to say, we're already looking at 26, but it's just the way the session works. Yeah, so that's kind of where things stand from kind of the bike ped legislation standpoint. Happy to do my best to answer questions or lean on others on the call if you have any questions.
Go ahead, Brad.
Brad?
You're muted still.
Nobody mutes Brad Olson. Maybe.
The double mute. I hit one.
They're trying to double mute. Yeah.
Oh, gets you every time. Hey, Dave, I had a question about your one. That was very interesting about the multi-lane roads. I assume from your description you shortcutted it, so I just want to clarify. I assume you're talking about like a 4-lane road, so there's 2 lanes going the same direction.
Yes.
Bikes in the right side, the car's got to move over to the inside. You didn't mean on a 2-lane road.
No, because
Wouldn't push the car into the oncoming lane.
Well, I mean, it is
I mean,
legal
they do
in
kind of
Illinois
move
now.
around you that way, but yeah.
So good. Thank you for clarifying. It's legal now in Illinois for motorists to pass a solid yellow line, when it's safe to do so. So on a 2-lane road, right?
Right.
So that would be where more like kind of the 3-foot standard comes into play. But you are correct. It is on multi-lane roads. And see if we can find this specific note here. And I'll put the link to the bill if you like reading through legalese. Yeah, provides that traffic control signals also apply to bicyclists. Okay, like we kind of knew that. Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to find it here real quick, but
Use the word loose advisory.
yeah. Oh, here we go. Requires that the operator of a motor vehicle overtaking a bicycle or individual proceeding in the same direction, if another lane of traffic proceeding in the same direction is available, make a lane change into another available lane with due regard for safety and traffic conditions, etc., to pass the bicyclist.
I think that's good because I think it mirrors what the law says for emergency vehicles too, right? When you're in a car, you're supposed to move around it. It seems like there's a consistency there.
Yeah, and in the Scots law, like you see a lot of other call them, I don't say special interest. There's another term, but the category of road users, we're already doing that. We see a disabled vehicle along the side of the road. I know my knee-jerk reaction is getting another lane. So it's kind of the same mentality, and maybe we can make that, that behavior change we want to see more motorists doing. Yeah. Any other questions? And we'll find this.
We had a couple in the chat. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you repeat what you said, Dave, about the fire safety, micromobility fire safety? Did you say that didn't go anywhere?
No, it Senate Bill 2247, I may have misspoke, it passed both houses. So unless the governor were to veto, and we were chatting with a lobbyist for the bills that are going to the governor's desk, she doesn't see any reason why they'd be vetoed. There's always that possibility. Yeah, so that's this 2247. And I know one of the hangups was the UL certification plus the European certification. And I believe it includes both of them. UL's an Illinois-based company. So at one point they were kind of doing a power play.
Yeah.
We only want UL, right? And so there was kind of this immediate need to push back. That's kind of the word we were getting. And then that was pulled out of the bill. So our understanding is that both of those standards are sufficient or will be sufficient once this goes into effect. And this does say effective January 1st, 2026. I mean, you can imagine if you're a retailer, online or brick and mortar, like there's going to be things they're going to have to get in place for something like this to kick in. Does that help, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm so happy this is passing. That's or gonna hopefully be a thing because it's
Yeah.
very needed.
I will say on that note, we've been chatting. So we've got planners and attorneys on our board, and so we really just yesterday posted on the Right Illinois website a guidance for municipalities when it comes to how do we safely integrate new mobility modes into our transportation network. And I think we all know there's the e-bike haters, the purists, whatever they might be, who don't necessarily see the practical use of these devices for people to get around on a daily basis. And so we put this guidance together. We haven't published it widely yet. We're already in an argument with somebody on social media. They don't think it goes far enough, but the idea, and maybe you all have seen this, certain, and quite honestly, without asking input of residents, municipalities are moving forward and putting out ordinances related to e-bikes and micromobility. I can speak to the village of Schaumburg that now requires a helmet if you want to ride an e-bike, or Elk Grove, my community, you have to be 18 to ride an e-bike. So they're making decisions based on kind of, I would say, flip decisions under the guise of public safety that could really limit who, to be quite honest, who can use these devices to get around. Is there, kind of some need to rein kids in on these little devices, and maybe, the few that ruin it for the many, right? The e-bike riders that are unsafe. And yes, understood. But banning devices or putting these kind of crazy restrictions on them is not the answer, because what happens, you basically tell people they got to drive a car then. And I was doing some research earlier. Everything I find says it's 99.9%, or, almost every pedestrian who's injured on the country's roads, it's motor vehicles. So it's kind of like deflecting, like, oh, look at what we're doing, right? We're developing this new ordinance, and this is how it's going to keep you safe. Or at the same time, we all know, the vehicle or motor travel that is severely injuring and killing people are motor vehicles. And so not really doing anything about that. So it's on our website. We're going to figure out how to share it, kind of sharing selectively right now. And it's not the answer for every community, but we wanted a starting point. Probably should have had this done sooner, because like I said, we're seeing more and more of these ordinances coming out, and they're developed in the mindset of bikes are toys, kids are reckless, not, hey, there's these new things that people, might want to use because a car costs 50 grand. So it's short-sighted in our opinion, what they're doing right now. I'll get off on my high horse now, but we've kind of immersed in this really for the past few days. We had a fundraiser last week, so it took, got a little bit of a break, but I think it's important. So as you're learning in your community, like if they're going to be voting on ordinances, read the details, share them with Active Trans, share them with Right Illinois, because there may be some things that when you have a conversation with the decision maker, elected official, which I just had the other night with the township official, and they realize, like, you can give them the real story about why these things are popular, and it could really change their tune. So I would just encourage folks to see what's going on in their community. Obviously, I missed it in Elk Grove. There's a history there I won't get into, but yeah, it's important, because once these things get baked into ordinance, it's hard to kind of undo some of that stuff.
Dave, I was actually going to ask about specifically regarding the Elk Grove. I know you said you missed it and all, but there was one of the things I saw in there was the requirement for the 35 mile per hour limitations.
Yeah.
And at least under the Northwest Municipal Conference's multimodal plan, Oakton Street is a planned bike route, but currently, while the project is in progress for development, the side paths aren't there. So where does that place residents, for example, in terms of potentially breaking the law. They're trying to make
Yeah.
use of routes that that the conference developed as potentialities.
I mean, I know that's a question, but I also think it's the answer. Where does a 16-year-old who maybe doesn't have a driver's license but has access to any, I mean, let's be honest, kids like these things are techie, right? Where's that kid supposed to, how are they supposed to get places? Or maybe they have a license, but they don't want to drive, but they have access to a scooter and they can't now legally. I think that it's a great point, Brian, like the 35 mile an hour, and they're allowed on streets that have a speed limit under 35 miles an hour. So even a street with 35 mile an hour speed limit is off limits according to the ordinance. The penalties in certain communities range from $200 to $500 to impounding. Like, why is this the focus when, again, it's motor vehicles, compliance with traffic laws, doing dangerous things. To me, that's a better use of law enforcement's time than pulling over a kid on a scooter because they're not wearing a helmet. Likely going to hurt themselves, not others. So yeah, I think when you look at the ordinances and you kind of figure, all right, well, now where does this person go? This is their situation, and now we've said these devices are no longer an option for them. I don't know that thought process was taking place in, while some of these ordinances are being drafted and now passed. So I don't know if that answers your question, Brian, or just adds to I think the concern that, some people are just left out. If you're low income, you don't own a car, or choose not to own a car, all of a sudden your options to move about your community may be limited under the guise of safety. Anything else on those topics?
I think there were some questions about just going a little bit back in the chat about kind of looking forward to next year. You mentioned doing some prioritization, or is there any thoughts on things that might happen next year? And then specifically the question about, do we anticipate safety stop coming back for another run next year?
I do think safety stop will come back. There is a story or history about that specific bill this year. It didn't start out as a safety stop bill. It kind of morphed into it. We had some concerns because this particular bill was only applying at four-way stops, not two-way stops, not alleys. It really, it could cause a lot of confusion if you're out on a bike, like, oh, hey, this is a four-way stop, I can do this, but now a two-way stop, I can't. And what do I do with this alley? And so I think it could be stronger, and we can look to other states for a stronger bill. Otherwise, e-bike rebates, I think, will be another topic. The bicyclist as permitted and intended users, the sponsor of that bill, Maura Hirschauer, this year, she's really fired up. She wants to spend time between sessions and build support because she eventually did not call the bill in the committee because she knew she didn't have the support. So there's some education that could happen there. Again, that's an Illinois exclusive to Illinois. And there's really no data showing that municipalities are going bankrupt because a bicyclist sues them. Anything with speed limits, I think, that's something we would look into as well. So I'm just kind of scrolling through the chat here. We kind of have our down and dirty list, but we do want to chat with our advocacy committee, which has a couple new members and board members, get that perspective from around the state, which is important as well. Did I answer? Let's see, what safety stop potentially in conflict with the new HB 2983? Yeah, right. I mean, that was just, Brad, that was just odd that was included. So potentially, right? I mean, this is, I think you're all realizing the devil's in the details. Even, and I will say, like the definition of the bicycle, like what was introduced by Rep Jimenez when we chatted with her was that, you know, a bicycle can have 2 or more wheels. It was that simple. And then it became through conversation with the Illinois Truckers Association, Illinois State Police, and others, they wanted to make sure it said human powered or low power electric. Got to have a seat. It's got to have pedals. So like, it's like that telephone game almost. Like where it started and where it ended. I mean, it's kind of the same result, which is good. But like, how did it get there? Yeah, those are all those backroom conversations that happen because with certain players like the Truckers Association, or you can imagine State Police, AAA, AARP, like some of these big players, like you really have to make sure they're on board, or they can, you know, they can cause a bill to fail. They're chatting with elected officials as well, so it's kind of part of the game, if you will. Which, you know, those of you that have been following Ride Illinois for a while, like, hey, we were in this space. We didn't have a lobbyist. Now we do. We're learning quite a bit. You know, my colleague Savannah's on the call, and so she, you know, she's learning quite a bit. So we're by no means experts, but what we've seen through this session has been really insightful. You know, I see Amy as she's the policy wonk, so we typically will ask her questions. But like once you kind of see how things work, you can change the strategy going in the hopes there's a, you know, a better outcome or a greater chance for success when it comes to legislation.
All right, awesome. Well, I think I want to make sure we have enough time for any kind of updates or announcements that folks want to share. I know, Dave, you had some things. No?
No, you know, any of those that you think are worth sharing, we could share afterwards. I'd
Okay,
rather
cool.
folks on the call.
Cool. Yeah. One thing I will plug is we registration is open for this year's Bike to Drive. But also we are busy recruiting volunteers. And so if you are interested in being a Bike to Drive volunteer, I will drop the link in a second into this. All right, Brian will be there. There's a lot of fun jobs. It's a fun day. If you've ever worked it, that's always a very rewarding experience. And we greatly appreciate your support. Go ahead, Brian.
I actually just asked it's exactly the question Andrew just asked in the
Oh.
chat. Because I think I brought this up last time with Maggie. Just I know historically Metra has announced special event trains less than a week before the event, which can make planning hard, especially for folks coming from further afield. And driving to Bike the Drive seems kind of counterintuitive. So yeah, just curious if there's what the conversations with Metra have been like yet so far in terms of having that earlier service for the Sundays.
Yeah, I know that the team that produces the event has talked about that, and it's on the radar. I'm not on that team, so I'm blissfully unaware of a lot of the details. But I will check in with them, and we can add that to, you know, follow-up email that we send probably on Monday. So yeah, thanks for asking about that. I do recall hearing that come up, so I think someone's on top of it, but I can confirm and get back to you. Looks like Ralph Shared Skokie Bike Network is celebrating its third Tales from the Trail event at Sketchbook, July 13th. I'm a big fan of their Amistosa Mexican lager. It's my go-to beers. Anything else folks want to share? Events, things happening? Brian again?
Yeah, sorry, I'm a little chatty on this one. Oh, awesome, Sarah. Cool to hear that. So first, just wanted to report that the Northwest Municipal Conference recently hosted its annual Bike and Pedestrian Committee field trip. This was a tour of both Mount Prospect and Des Plaines Rand Road side path that is built out just over 4 miles of connections along Rand Road up in the northwest suburbs. And there will be some connections being added to that, expanding it further north almost to Euclid in Mount Prospect, and to the Des Plaines River Trail due to projects created by IDOT and the Village of Mount Prospect. So that's a great opportunity for folks in the region to have a improved connection. So thank you to the folks who attended that. And additionally, Northwest Municipal Conference is currently looking for or is currently accepting applicants from the municipalities. I'm going to clarify this for positions on their bicycle and pedestrian and transportation committees. Now, these appointments have to come from the municipality, whether it's the mayor or the city manager making the appointment. But if your community is concerned, like very interested in bike issues, that perhaps they want to be a little bit more engaged in regional discussions, highly encourage them to make an application and submit that this summer. If folks need to connect their electeds or bicycle pedestrian committee members with us, happy to. I'll put my contact information in the chat so that way you all can reach out.
Awesome. Yeah, and some good stuff showing up in the chat too. Evanston's launching a public education series and expanded bike network and more Divvy stations coming. This sounds really cool. Architecture, bike tour, and Riverside that Valerie shared. Lots of good stuff going on. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This was a really fabulous time together. Appreciate all of your participation and energy, and we will be back in August with a Suburban Advocacy Connect. But in the meantime, in July, we have our City of Chicago focused complimentary call. So if you're interested in anything happening in the City of Chicago, that's July 11th. We'll be back here. But otherwise, stay tuned to activetrans.org and rideillinois.org and all the socials. Hopefully we'll be making some noise and get a special session here and take another run at transit reform and funding sooner rather than later. But appreciate you all and hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thanks, Jim.
And
Thank
stay
you.
cool.
Thank you.